Imagine creatures that have been around since the time of the dinosaurs and even before, and are still alive today. Some of the most incredible creatures on Earth have been around for millions of years. The Eerie monkfish, with its fishing pole lure, to a creature living in freezing waters with a 1,000-year lifespan. And the gharial, with its unique snout designed for catching fish. These are ancient creatures still alive today. Well, this is a strange looking creature. It's called the velvet worm. These odd but cute little creatures have been around for over 500 million years. Their appearance hasn't changed much. If you've ever seen one, you might think it's a cross between a worm and an insect, but it's neither. It's in its own branch on the tree of life. And I think I get what makes them sorta cute. It's their soft, velvety bodies. They almost look like little fairy tale creatures. Velvet worms are typically about 2 to 10 centimeters long and have segmented bodies with tiny legs that allow them to move slowly across the forest floor. They don't look like it, but they also hunt in a very interesting way. They don't chase down their prey. Instead, they shoot out this sticky adhesive substance from glands near their heads to trap smaller animals. Then they walk over to their prey and eat it alive, using their sharp mandibles to chew through the body. The adhesive can be so strong that the worm can capture animals several times its size. The reason they've survived this long, seemingly unchanged, is partly thanks to their incredibly efficient hunting style. They've found a niche that works perfectly well for them, so there's no need to change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Lungfish are some of the oldest creatures to have ever lived on Earth, dating back more than 400 million years. These fish are often considered the closest living relatives to the first creatures that made the transition from water to land. They've evolved a set of highly specialized traits that allow them to survive in environments where other fish just wouldn't. Lungfish can breathe air. A fish that can breathe air. How wild is that? While most fish use gills to extract oxygen from water, lungfish have both gills and lungs, so they can survive in low oxygen environments like stagnant ponds or dried up riverbeds. And when there's a drought, some species of lungfish can even bury themselves in mud and enter this almost hibernation state, breathing air through their lungs until water returns. Gee, I wonder why these things have survived for hundreds of millions of years. While other fish species may have been wiped out during mass extinctions, lungfish have adapted to survive, making them one of the longest living groups of fish, so cheers to them. The nautilus is one of the most iconic creatures from the deep. When you look at paintings of ancient sea life amongst all the scary extinct monsters, you'll usually see these things as well, but they're still around. The nautilus has been swimming the oceans for over 500 million years. If you've ever seen one, you'll immediately recognize the spiral shell-like structure that it's famous for. The nautilus belongs to an ancient group of cephalopods, which also includes modern squids, octopuses, and cuttlefish. But unlike its more evolved relatives, the nautilus hasn't changed much. It's sometimes called a living fossil, as it's considered one of the oldest species still around today. These things have survived through massive extinction events, and one of the reasons it's managed to stick around for so long is that it's very adaptable in its diet. Nautiluses are opportunistic feeders, scavenging on dead fish and crustaceans and smaller marine life. They're also known to hunt smaller fish using their tentacles. But that shell, it's just beautiful, and a big part of that is because it follows the Fibonacci sequence, a pattern that appears a lot, from the branching of trees to the arrangement of petals and flowers. Sturgeons are massive fish that have been around for more than 200 million years. They were here long before the dinosaurs and have survived through major shifts in the Earth's climate and environment. They're hard to miss. They can grow over 12 feet long and weigh up to 1,500 pounds. They're one of the largest species of fish alive today. Sturgeon are also known as living fossils. They have armored bodies covered in bony plates, and their long, pointy snouts are perfect for sifting through mud and sand in search of food. Unlike many other fish, sturgeons don't have teeth. Instead, they have a specialized structure known as barbels on their snouts, which they use to sense their prey. Sturgeons are bottom feeders, relying on their sense of touch and smell to find things like worms and small fish. Again, in the mud down there. They also spend a significant part of their lives in fresh water, but then move to salt water to breed, which makes their life cycle very unique. The tuatara is also called a living fossil, and for good reason. Native only to New Zealand, this reptile is the last surviving member of an ancient order called Rhynchocephalia, a group that lived over 200 million years ago. Despite resembling a lizard, tuataras are not actually lizards, but they belong to the same reptile family. Their closest relatives went extinct a long time ago, and what makes the tuatara even more fascinating is its unique physiology. For example, they have a third eye on the top of their head. It's not very noticeable, but it is there, and it's known as a parietal eye, which is sensitive to light and helps regulate their circadian rhythm. It doesn't work like their other eyes, but it is pretty cool that it's there, and it connects them to more ancient reptiles when their ancestors had more complex ways of sensing things. Another fun fact, the tuatara is incredibly slow growing, and they can live for over 100 years. Monkfish, also known as anglerfish, are a bizarre and ancient species that have been lurking in the deep oceans for over 100 million years. They have a very unique and eerie appearance with their flat, wide bodies, their enormous mouths, the sharp teeth, the bumpiness. Monkfish just look like something from another time. They live in deep water where there's not much light, so they've developed an interesting survival tactic. They have a lure on their heads, a fleshy filament that they use to attract prey. The lure is similar to a fishing pole, and the monkfish dangles it in front of its mouth to attract smaller fish. When a potential meal gets too close, the monkfish strikes, using its large mouth to engulf the prey whole. These fish are excellent predators, capable of swallowing fish much larger than themselves. They're also super adaptable. They can live in all kinds of depths and at different parts of the ocean, so this mix of flexibility and clever hunting has helped them stick around as long as they have. Antarctic sponges are another incredible example of creatures that have survived for a very long time in some of the harshest environments on Earth. These sponges can live for hundreds, even thousands of years, making them some of the oldest living creatures in the animal kingdom. So why do they live so long? Well, it's a result of the frigid environment, which slows their metabolism. In fact, some Antarctic sponges have been found to grow less than 1 millimeter per year, meaning they can take thousands of years to reach their full size. They're found in the icy waters of Antarctica, surviving in a region where very few other species can handle the freezing temperatures and the constant darkness. Something else very strange about these things is they don't rely on sunlight for energy. Instead, they feed on microscopic plankton and bacteria that drift through the water. Antarctic sponges are also super important for the health of the ecosystem. They provide habitats for other organisms, and they play an important role in recycling nutrients. The gharial is a large crocodile-like reptile native to the rivers of the Indian subcontinent. They're the crocodiles that you've seen in nature documentaries, and you're like, oh wait, what the hell is that thing? Doesn't look like a normal crocodile. With that long, thin snout, it's definitely one of the most unique members of the crocodile family. Gharials have been around for over 200 million years, surviving through climate changes and massive shifts in the Earth's ecosystems. They're specialized fish eaters. Their weird snouts are just perfectly suited for catching fish. They use their sharp teeth to grab slippery fish with incredible speed. Unlike other crocodiles, gharials don't need to chase down their prey on land. They just lurk underwater, waiting for the right moment to strike. Their snouts make them highly adaptable for life in rivers, where they often swim with their bodies submerged while keeping only their eyes and nostrils above water. Unfortunately, despite how ancient these things are, the gharial is now critically endangered, with only a few hundred of them left. Horseshoe crabs are another ancient creature that's been around for over 450 million years. Now, horseshoe crabs aren't true crabs. They're actually more closely related to spiders and scorpions, which is odd. These things have a hard horseshoe-shaped exoskeleton and long tails that they use to steer and maintain balance in the ocean. They live in shallow coastal waters where they feed on small creatures like worms and algae. What's truly nuts about horseshoe crabs, though, is their unique bodily fluids. It contains a substance called hemolymph, which is used and a special test for bacterial contamination in medical devices and vaccines. This test is critical for making sure pharmaceutical products are safe, so horseshoe crabs have still found a way to be helpful after hundreds of millions of years. And their BLOOD, it's also blue, so that's pretty cool. As you can imagine though, because it's so useful in modern medicine, it's also quite sought after. And over-harvesting has put horseshoe crab populations at risk, making them another ancient species that may not be around forever. The coelacanth is perhaps the most famous living fossil of them all. These deep-sea fish were thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs around 65 million years ago, but in 1938 a fisherman off the coast of South Africa pulled up a specimen, shocking the scientific world. These things are the definition of living fossils. They've barely changed since they first appeared over 400 million years ago. These guys have very unusual fins. Unlike most fish, coelacanths have paired lobed fins, which are believed to be the ancestors of the limbs that would eventually evolve in land animals. These fins are highly flexible, and when the coelacanth swims, it moves its fins in this graceful, alternating motion, almost like it's walking on the seafloor. This adaptation has led scientists to believe that coelacanths could hold the key to understanding how some of the earliest creatures on Earth made that transition from water to living on land. Coelacanths are incredibly rare, living at depths of 200 to 2,000 feet in the Indian Ocean. In 2006, scientists made an extraordinary discovery at White Sands National Park in New Mexico. While walking along the park's gypsum dunes, they noticed these dark spots in the ground that looked like footprints. Not all that incredible on its own, but these were not just footprints. They actually turned out to be fossilized tracks left behind by animals and humans during the Ice Age. Over the next few years, there were excavations, and they found that there were animal footprints from animals like Harlan's ground sloth, which were these massive 10-foot sloths that weighed over a ton. They also found dire wolf prints, which were a species of large prehistoric canine, and then there were the human footprints. They were found in layers of sediment that had been preserved for thousands of years, and what's really cool is that this meant humans had been in North America much earlier than we previously thought. Radiocarbon dating showed that the human tracks were at least 22,000 years old. Before this, the belief was that humans only arrived about 13,000 to 16,000 years ago. In 2018, researchers discovered a set of footprints from a woman walking with a child. The tracks show her walking for almost a mile, occasionally carrying the youngster and then setting them down as they went. And there were other amazing prints as well. One set showed what looked like humans having stalked a giant sloth. It's just cool that they were able to form such specific scenes out of these prints. Helps us imagine what their daily lives might have been like. Just last year, a baby woolly mammoth named Jana was discovered in Siberia. This mammoth had been frozen in permafrost for 50,000 years, and her remains are the best preserved mammoth ever found. Jana was only about 6 months old when she died, and the preservation is incredible. Parts of her fur, skin, and trunk are still intact, and that's because the permafrost in Siberia acts like a giant freezer, preserving animals and plants that have been trapped in the ice even for thousands and thousands of years. And in more recent years, as more and more ice has been melting, discoveries like Jana are happening more often. What makes Jana so important though is that studying her can tell us a lot about how mammoths lived. They're able to learn about the cold environment she lived in based on her skin and fur, and her age means she most likely depended on her mother and other herd members to survive. A lot of mammoth remains are damaged or they're just incomplete, but Jana is giving scientists a chance to study a young mammoth in a lot more detail. Also in 2024, scientists made a huge breakthrough when they sequenced the genome of another woolly mammoth found in Siberia. This one had been frozen for 52,000 years. By sequencing the genome, they were able to form this kind of map of the mammoth's genetic makeup. And this is important because it opens the door to understanding the biology of woolly mammoths in a way that's never been possible before. The mammoth's DNA reveals a lot about how these ancient creatures were built, how they adapted to life in the freezing cold. For example, scientists can now see how the woolly mammoth's fur and fat layers were genetically programmed to survive the cold. And even crazier, this could help in de-extincting the woolly mammoth, basically using its DNA to bring it back. Scientists are trying to use the genetic code to potentially create woolly mammoths through things like cloning or genetic engineering. Yeah, this is actually becoming a real possibility now. Being able to study the mammoth's genome is also helping scientists learn more about how mammoths went extinct. By comparing mammoth DNA to modern elephants, researchers can track the genetic changes that happened over thousands of years and figure out why the furry guys disappeared. Next up is the discovery of Kennewick Man in 1996, a set of human remains found along the Columbia River in Washington. The remains were estimated to be over 9,000 years old. At first they thought the remains came from a member of a Native American tribe. There was a huge debate at the time. Native American tribes immediately claimed they were the bones of their ancestors and wanted them to be returned so they could bury them properly. On the other hand, scientists wanted to study the remains to learn more about early human migration. Well, in the end, the remains were studied further, and there were some fascinating findings. Genetic tests revealed that Kennewick Man's DNA was actually most closely related to people from the Pacific Rim, especially Japan. This was a bit of a curveball. The traditional theory was that the first settlers of the Americas came from Siberia across the Bering Land Bridge. Now it looked like they might have come from a completely different area. In 1916, a pretty controversial discovery was made in Vero Beach, Florida. Human bones were found buried alongside the remains of massive Ice Age animals like mastodons and mammoths. You can only imagine how blown away people would have been back in the day learning about this. The fact that human bones were mixed in with fossils of giant creatures painted this very wild picture. And the fact that humans were living alongside these ancient prehistoric beasts. The bones were radiocarbon dated to around 14,000 years old, which pushed the timeline of human arrival in the Americas back further than most experts were thinking at the time, and some people were pretty skeptical. Was this an authentic find or was it a hoax? Well, with the advancement of new testing techniques, it was later confirmed that the remains were indeed human. The discovery became a huge piece of evidence that humans lived at the same time as giant animals, much earlier than people thought, which only opened up other theories about how ancient humans spread across the continent. In Canada's Yukon, scientists have made some pretty amazing discoveries. Woolly mammoth and bison perfectly preserved in permafrost. Just like in Siberia, the icy ground here keeps animals' remains in pretty amazing condition. The preservation gives researchers this rare look at how these animals lived during the Ice Age. But it's not just mammoths and bison that have been found. The permafrost has also preserved prehistoric plants, insects, and parasites. The fact that these remains are so well preserved gives clues about what these creatures ate, how they behaved. For example, researchers can examine the mammoth's teeth and stomach contents to learn more about what they ate. In Egypt's Sahara Desert, there's a place called the Cave of Swimmers, famous for its ancient paintings. What's weird is a bunch of these images show what looks a lot like people swimming, which is strange because the Sahara is of course this dry, arid desert now, but it wasn't always that way. The paintings are believed to be about 10,000 years old, long before the Sahara became the desert that we know today. Back then, the area was much greener, with lakes, rivers, and plenty of plants, so plenty of wildlife could have lived there, including humans. The Cave of Swimmers tells us the Sahara's climate used to be much wetter, and it's kind of the bridge between the lush stretch of land it used to be and the desert we see now. The early humans who painted in these caves were likely some of the first to adapt to the changing environment. It's possible they may have even seen how things were changing and wanted to document their daily lives, leave something behind so that future generations would know what it was like before. But that's just my theory. In 2002, scientists made an incredible discovery at Blombos Cave in South Africa. They found some of the oldest known artwork in the world, pieces of ochre carved with intricate patterns that were around 75,000 years old. That is a very long time ago. So long ago that it completely changed our understanding of when humans first started to show signs of more modern behavior, like creating art. Along with the carvings, the cave also showed evidence of early tools and jewelry, objects that hint at this much more sophisticated, complex culture than we would have pictured for the time. Turns out, these early humans were capable of symbolic thinking. They were forming social structures and using creativity in ways we just hadn't expected. Basically, we thought that they were just really dumb. The extinction of Ice Age animals like mammoths, saber-tooth cats, and giant sloths has always been a tricky topic. Some scientists think humans hunted these animals to extinction. Others say climate change is to blame, but recent discoveries are giving us a more clear picture. In 2020, a study of Ice Age bones showed that the megafauna were wiped out by this mix of human hunting and drastic climate changes. The animals were already struggling because the climate was warming when humans started hunting them, and that combination led to their disappearance in North America and Europe. But the extinction might not have happened all at once. In some places, animals like mammoths stuck around longer than we thought. Some even survived until about 4,000 years ago. For centuries, the native Paiute people of Nevada told stories of giant, pale-skinned invaders called the Sitka. These giants were said to be fierce, red-headed warriors who arrived in the region thousands of years before, attacking local tribes. The legend says that the tribes eventually teamed up, chased the giants into a cave, and wiped them out. These stories seemed like mere myth until bones started turning up in Lovelock Cave. In 1911, two miners discovered what looked like huge human skeletons in the cave. Some of these skeletons were reportedly between 7 and 8 feet tall. More excavations in 1912 and 1924 unearthed thousands of artifacts, including a giant sandal measuring 15 inches long, which seemed to support the idea that something unusual had happened there. But that wasn't all. A large handprint embedded in the cave's rock was also found, and it was about twice the size of an average human hand. And then in 1931, the Nevada Review miner reported the discovery of 2 mummified skeletons in a dry lake bed near Lovelock, allegedly measuring between 8.5 and 10 feet tall, covered in red hair. Here's something you probably wouldn't be expecting to see on this list: ancient camels. Believe it or not, camels actually first appeared in North America more than 40 million years ago. Over time, they split into 2 main groups: the camels we know today and the relatives, llamas and alpacas. The camels made their way across the Bering Land Bridge, while llamas and alpacas moved south. But there was another species, the Camelops hasturnus, which stuck around in North America until the Ice Age. Some of these camels roamed as far south as Honduras, while others made it all the way to Alaska and the Yukon. In 2008, gold miners in Alaska discovered some Ice Age bones, which turned out to belong to this extinct camel species. The bones were so well preserved in the cold that researchers managed to extract DNA. Imagine a 6-foot-long beaver weighing 220 pounds. Ice Age giant beavers had 6-inch long front teeth. They would have looked like fierce predators, but they didn't eat meat. This massive rodent was about the size of a black bear and had a tail that resembled a muskrat's rather than today's typical beaver tail. A 2019 study looked at fossils from the Yukon and Ohio dating back 10,000 to 50,000 years and revealed that the giant beaver's diet consisted mostly of aquatic plants. Tessa Plint, a researcher with Heriot-Watt University, explained that by studying the chemical makeup of fossilized bones and teeth, scientists can figure out what an animal ate even tens of thousands of years later. Understanding the diet of these ancient animals helps them learn more about how climate change affected them. As the earth warmed and dried, the giant beaver couldn't compete with smaller, more adaptable beavers that survived. In 2010, a team of Russian scientists found a well-preserved mammoth in Siberia, later named Yuka. She was a young mammoth, about 6 to 8 years old, and she lived around 39,000 years ago. Yuka's body was in really good shape. Its body measured about 2.5 meters long, and it was remarkably intact, with her trunk, bones, some of her flesh, hair, and eyes still preserved, making her one of the most well-preserved mammoth specimens ever found. Pretty incredible to see. I haven't seen it in person, but based on pictures and video that I've seen of it, it's crazy how well preserved it is. They think she might have fallen into a mud pit or drowned, which helped preserve her so well. People probably butchered her for meat, too, as there were cut marks on her bones. In 2002, an amazing discovery was made in northern Siberia. The remains of a woolly mammoth were found frozen in the permafrost near the Siberian village of Yukagir. The specimen, which was an adult male, turned out to be in remarkable condition. This mammoth's head, still covered in skin, was so well preserved that it looked almost almost fresh. When polar explorer Bernard Bouygues heard about the find, he led a team to retrieve the mammoth's remains. The team made 3 trips to the site, carefully gathering pieces of the mammoth's body and putting them together. Gave scientists a ton of information about woolly mammoths. For example, they discovered that the mammoth had temporal glands between its eyes and ears. These glands would have helped regulate body temperature. The mammoth's feet were also a key find. The soles had deep cracks in it, which would have helped the animal grip icy surfaces while walking. The specimen also included the tusks, front legs, and even parts of the stomach and intestines. Based on the size of its bones and tusks, scientists estimated that this mammoth was over 9 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed around 4 to 5 tons. Scimitar cats, or homotheriums, were fierce prehistoric predators. Their fossils are rare. Because of this, scientists used to think that they were part of a small population. That changed in 2011 when a bone was found in permafrost at a mining site near Dawson City in Canada. This bone belonged to a scimitar cat, not a saber-tooth cat, which are often confused with scimitar cats. Scimitar cats had shorter curved teeth that were serrated, unlike the long, flat teeth of saber-tooths. What made this find even more exciting was how well preserved the bone was in the ice. Researchers at the University of Copenhagen were able to sequence the entire genome from this bone. Their genetic makeup hints towards a scimitar-toothed cats as being highly skilled hunters, said Michael Westbury, an evolutionary genomicist at the University of Copenhagen. Going on to say they, quote, likely had very good daytime vision and displayed complex social behaviors, end quote. These cats also had adaptations for endurance. Their bones and cardiovascular systems were strong. They were built for long-distance running. And based on this, researchers believe scimitar cats hunted in packs, wearing down their prey during the day. Scientists estimated the specimen was over 47,500 years old. Scimitar cats likely went extinct around 10,000 years ago, along with many of the animals that they hunted, like mammoths and woolly rhinos. Most people think of hyenas as the scavengers of Africa, but the ancient Arctic also had its share of these creatures as well. These ancient hyenas lived over 5 million years ago, and its remains have been found around the world, from Mongolia to Kansas to Mexico. In 2019, evolutionary biologist Jack Sang analyzed a pair of fossilized hyena teeth from the Yukon. He quickly identified them as belonging to a species that once roamed the ancient Arctic. These teeth likely belonged to a hyena that lived around 850,000 to 1.4 million years ago. This hyena was equipped with teeth perfect for crushing bones, probably feeding on ancient caribou, bison, and maybe even baby mammoths. Eventually, these hyenas disappeared, and researchers think they were outcompeted by other Ice Age predators like the short-faced bear or bone-crushing dog. Never heard of those before till today. What an awesome name. In 2018, miners working at Hester Creek in the Yukon discovered a mummified squirrel, perfectly preserved from around 30,000 years before. At first, this lump of fur, claws, and limbs didn't look like much, but scientists examined it more and realized that they'd found an Arctic ground squirrel that had died during hibernation. Researchers nicknamed the squirrel Hester after the area where it was discovered, and it's amazing to think that this little guy was running around the Yukon several thousand years ago, said museum representatives. When the mummified squirrel was first found, its exact identity wasn't clear until the team noticed little hands, claws, and a tail. Grant Zazula, a paleontologist from the Yukon government, was part of the team that studied the squirrel, saying, "It's not quite recognizable until you see those little hands and these claws, and you see a little tail, and then you see ears." The team figured that Hester was likely hibernating when it died. Arctic ground squirrels curl up into balls like this, one when they hibernate in underground dens, often lined with nests made of leaves. These nests are usually found empty, so finding one with an actual squirrel inside was pretty cool. To avoid damaging the specimen, they decided not to unravel the ball of fur. Instead, they had it x-rayed by a local veterinarian who'd expected the bones to be in pretty bad condition, but when the x-ray results came in, the squirrel's skeleton was actually in great condition, and it looked nearly identical to a modern Arctic ground squirrel. In 2021, scientists discovered a tiny microscopic creature that had been frozen in Siberian permafrost for over 24,000 years. The team found it buried 11.5 feet deep. The little animal was what's called a belloid rotifer, and despite being frozen solid for thousands of years, it actually came back to life. And on top of that, it was still able to reproduce. Rotifers are tough little creatures. They typically live in freshwater or moist soil and are known for surviving in extreme conditions like radiation, dehydration, low oxygen, and freezing temperatures. To confirm its age, scientists radiocarbon dated the soil surrounding the critter. Stas Malaven, a co-author of the study, couldn't believe it, saying, "We revived animals that saw woolly mammoths," which is quite impressive. I agree. Next on the list we have Sanek. In 2021, there was a pretty amazing discovery in Greenland, a new dinosaur. New in that we didn't know it existed, not a living dinosaur, sadly. Researchers identified a previously unknown dinosaur species based on well-preserved skulls. This newfound species was named Isi Sanek, meaning cold bone in Greenlandic Inuit. The remains of this creature date back to the late Triassic period, about 214 million years ago. The skulls were first found in 1994, and at the time they were believed to belong to a Plateosaurus, but recent advancements in research techniques, including micro-CT scans, showed that these skulls actually belonged to a different dino altogether, a dinosaur that was different from any known species. To visualize the full form of the skulls, researchers used digital modeling after the micro-CT scans. These were bipedal herbivores, medium-sized, and shared a lot of similarities with sauropods. Those are those long-necked, giraffe-looking dinosaurs you probably remember from Jurassic Park. But the Isi Sanek would have been a lot smaller than them. They're pretty cool-looking dinosaurs, almost like a sauropod mixed with a velociraptor, at least to me. In 2016, scientists discovered a 12,400-year-old mummified puppy. This puppy was discovered in the permafrost along a river in Siberia. Researchers believe the puppy died in a landslide, and its body became preserved in the ice. Its fur was intact, and the body, from its nose to its tail, was almost completely preserved. The only part that wasn't in perfect condition was the brain, which had started to decompose, but even still, about 70 to 80% of the brain was still intact. This puppy is one of the few animals in the Pleistocene era which has a well-preserved brain. While there have been other dog fossils found from the same time period, they were too decomposed to study. The puppy's condition is especially special because its brain could help researchers learn more about ancient animals. In fact, they were saying at the time that they could potentially use the DNA and tissues from this puppy to bring it back to life, which would have been nuts. Along with the frozen puppy, human tools were found near the site, meaning that this dog was domesticated and owned by people. In March of 2011, Sean Funk, a shovel operator at a mine in Fort McMurray, Alberta, was digging when he made an amazing discovery. A discovery that turned out to be Alberta's oldest dinosaur fossil and one of the best preserved ever found in the entire world. Honestly, this has to be the most amazing dinosaur discovery that I've ever read about. And I think Don Henderson, curator of dinosaurs at the Royal Tyrrell Museum, agrees, saying at the time, "Right away we knew it was going to be something good, but we had no idea how good it was going to be." So after getting the fossil back to the museum, Don and his team got to work, and 6 years later the dinosaur was named Borealopelta markmichelli. The name Borealopelta means shield of the north, and the species name honors Mark Mitchell, the museum technician who spent over 7,000 grueling hours removing the dinosaur from rock. Now, I'm not done with this one. There's just too much to talk about with this discovery to cram it into one point. So as I said, the Borealopelta was incredibly well preserved. It was covered in thick armor, especially around its neck. It also had these massive 20-inch spikes at the shoulders that were assumed to be for fighting, but Victoria Arbour, a curator of paleontology, also thought they might have been a display of health and strength, similar to the horns of a bull or tusks of an elephant. Now here's what's utterly crazy to me though. This dinosaur was so intact, they were able to see what was in its stomach. There were twigs and ferns in there, suggesting it ate during the wet season. Scientists think it could have been swept away by a flash flood, eventually sinking to the bottom of the sea. The body would have flipped over and sank, with its thick back and bloated belly causing it to be preserved in sediment, creating a natural time capsule that kept it safe for 110 million years. Here's another crazy thing about this find though. They were even able to determine, to a certain degree, what color the creature was. Most of the fossil was covered in relatively well-preserved skin, and from this, they were able to study pigment cells called melanosomes. Melanosomes are seen in nature all the time. It's what gives many modern-day animals unique markings like spots and stripes. It's rare to see melanosomes in fossils, but again, Boreal-pelta was especially well preserved. At least one component of Boreal-pelta's color was this reddish brown, said Caleb Brown from the Royal Tyrrell Museum. The color on its back may have been part of a camouflage pattern called countershading, helping it blend into its environment and avoid predators. Now, also in 2011, a team of paleontologists led by William Hammer discovered a new species of ancient dinosaur in the frozen mountains of Antarctica, an area that's usually thought of as one of the coldest places on Earth, but of course, millions of years ago, it was much warmer. The dinosaur was small, around 4 to 5 feet long, and had bird-like hip bones. It was likely related to early plant eaters like the Ferbosaur and Heterodontosaur, which were the ancestors of larger and more famous dinos like Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus. The fossils were found on Mount Kirkpatrick, part of the central transatlantic mountains. Hammer and his team uncovered a leg and foot, but they weren't sure if they had found the dinosaur's head. It would take about a year to fully understand what they'd found. Thomas Holtz, a geology professor at the University of Maryland, noted that the find could help fill gaps in both dinosaur evolution and the ancient Antarctic environment, saying that this discovery was from a time when dinosaurs were just starting to take over, comparing these early small plant eaters to rabbits, fast, common, and without armor, but important to the overall evolution of the giant plant eaters that came later. Finding fossils in Antarctica is extremely challenging because of the harsh conditions and short research window. Hammer had been trying to return to the site since 1990, but bad weather and helicopter problems cut short his 2003 trip. As Holtz put it, anytime we find fossils there, it's a brand new species. It's practically unexplored territory. So these weren't the only dino remains William Hammer discovered in the mountains of Antarctica. In 1990, he and his team discovered a 22-foot meat-eating dinosaur called Cryolophosaurus. This was a big deal because it was the first dinosaur ever found in Antarctica. Cryolophosaurus was a meat-eating dinosaur that lived around 190 million years ago during the early Jurassic period. It was about 20 to 23 feet long, 6 to 7 meters, and weighed roughly 1,000 pounds. What really sets this dinosaur apart was its unique crest. The crest, found on the top of its head, had a very unusual shape, kind of like a frozen backwards mohawk. There are like two kind of things here. It's believed that the crest could have been used for display, either to attract mates or to communicate with other members of its species. As Hammer put it, it looked like a frozen crested reptile, which is how they got the name Cryolophosaurus, meaning frozen crested lizard. And again, in the early 1990s, William Hammer of Augustana College discovered more incredible fossils on Mount Kirkpatrick. These particular fossils included parts of a foot, leg, and ankle bones from a long-necked dinosaur that lived around 190 million years ago. It wasn't until much later, though, that the fossil was identified. The fossils were painstakingly removed from the ice and rock using jackhammers, rock saws, and chisels under extremely difficult conditions, said Nathan Smith, a graduate student at the Field Museum in Chicago. After a lot of hard work, Smith and paleontologist Diego Pohl realized they'd found a new species of dinosaur, which they named Glacialosaurus hammeri. This dinosaur was about 20 to 25 feet long and would have weighed between 4 to 6 tons. It belonged to a group called sauropodomorphs, which includes some of the largest dinosaurs ever. Think of those massive-sized, long-necked plant eaters. Around 20,000 years ago, a young woolly rhinoceros was going about its day in what's now northern Siberia. It was probably foraging for food when it made an oopsie and drowned in a river. Fast forward to 2020, and that same woolly rhino became a huge discovery for scientists. As rising temperatures cause permafrost to melt, creatures like this long extinct rhino are being uncovered, giving researchers a glimpse into prehistoric times. Permafrost is a layer of soil that's been frozen for thousands of years, great for preserving ancient remains. The woolly rhino's carcass was found by a local farmer in Yakutia, Siberia, about 15,000 years after the species went extinct. The fossil was incredibly well preserved, with its fur, hooves, and internal organs still intact. But what made this discovery even more special was the rhino's horn, which is rarely found in such good condition because cartilage usually decomposes relatively quickly. In 2018, a local man named Pavel Efimov made an incredible discovery in Siberia: the severed head of a giant wolf, perfectly preserved beneath the permafrost. But this wolf was nearly 40,000 years old. It wasn't until 2019 that researchers started studying it in detail. The big question they were trying to answer was whether the wolf's head had been chopped off by humans or separated by ice. The cut on the wolf's neck wasn't what you'd expect from ice separation. It was rougher, less smooth, meaning it might have been made by something like a tool. The severed head is quite large, measuring about 40 centimeters, much bigger than the typical 25 centimeter head of a modern Siberian wolf. It had a thick mammoth-like coat, sharp fangs, and some parts of its skull seemed more developed than today's wolves. In 2016, ornithologist Stephen Emsley made a surprising find during a research trip in Antarctica. He stumbled on ancient penguin remains at Cape Urzar near the Ross Sea, and what he discovered there was unlike anything he'd seen before. Now, at first, Emsley was researching ancient penguin remains at the site, following a lead about penguin droppings. He didn't expect to find much, since explorers like Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton hadn't recorded any penguin sightings in the area. But when Emsley arrived, he found something unexpected: white splotchy guano stains and loose chick bones, which usually indicate that a penguin colony had recently occupied the site, but that wasn't the case. Investigating further, he found complete penguin chick carcasses and even intact mummies. The site must have been covered by snow and ice soon after the colony was last abandoned, preserving the surface remains for centuries, Emsley went on to write. The site had been used by penguins at different times in the past, with carbon dating showing it was occupied 3 times starting around 5,000 years ago. The site's location and the penguins' repeated visits were likely because of changing ice conditions, which would open and close the coast to the penguins. Emsley believes that this area could potentially see penguins returning in the future as climate change melts the sea ice earlier each summer, giving them access to the coast again. In 2018, some fossil ivory hunters in northeastern Siberia made a pretty cool discovery. While digging into the permafrost, they unearthed the carcass of a bird, but this bird was a 46,000-year-old specimen, perfectly frozen in time. The discovery was sent to paleontologist Lovelock and a team of researchers at the Swedish Museum of Natural History. The bird is believed to be an ancestor of the horned lark, which is found in places like northern Russia and Mongolia today. It's a cool find though, the first bird of its kind ever to be discovered. The fact that the bird was almost completely intact made it one of the best preserved ancient animals ever found. The bird was found near Balayagora, a village in Yakutia, an area known as the Pole of Cold because of its extremely cold winters, sometimes reaching as low as -60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly -50 degrees Celsius. That is just too cold. The researchers think that the end of the last ice age led to the formation of a new subspecies of animals like this bird. The discovery adds to a list of well-preserved creatures found in the same area, like a 42,000-year-old foal and an 18,000-year-old puppy, both of which I've talked about in previous videos. In 2007 and 2008, 2 baby mammoths, later named Lyuba and Chroma, were found in Siberia. They were so well preserved that researchers were able to piece together how they died, even though both calves, one about 1 month old and the other 2 months old, died more than 40,000 years ago. Scientists used CT scans to find that the 2 mammoths probably choked on mud after falling into water. Daniel Fisher, a co-author of the study, stated the mud was like a really thick batter that they got clogged in their trachea and they were unable to dislodge by coughing. Basically preserved them from taking another breath. Lyuba and the 1-month-old calf was discovered by a reindeer herder. Chroma was found in 2008, frozen upright in permafrost. Scavengers had eaten parts of her heart, lungs, and skull. But both mummies still showed a neonatal line on their teeth, a marker of stress during birth, which helped scientists estimate their ages. CT scans of Lyuba showed signs of what's called a mammalian dive reflex, showing that she fell through the ice into a muddy lake where she tried to clear the mud from her airways but eventually suffocated. Chroma, who had a belly full of breast milk, also had mud in her trachea, but her death is a bit less cut and dry. But according to researchers, it's possible she fell into a river, broke her back, and was then buried in mud while trying to escape. In 2015, scientists in Siberia discovered a baby woolly rhino, perfectly preserved in a frozen riverbank. Nicknamed Sasha after the man who found it, the rhino calf is the most complete specimen of its kind ever discovered. Sasha lived around 10,000 years ago, was about 1.5 meters long, or almost 5 feet, and 0.8 meters high, about 2.6 feet, much smaller than the fully grown adults, which could reach up to 15 feet long. According to Albert Protopopov from the Yakutian Academy of Sciences, baby woolly rhinos are incredibly rare to find, so this was a pretty amazing discovery, especially because it helps researchers learn more about the early life of these animals, which they didn't really know much about before. Woolly rhinos went extinct around 10,000 years ago. Climate change and habitat loss likely led to their extinction, but some scientists also think overhunting may have been a part of it. Around 30,000 years ago in Siberia, a tiny cave lion cub was making its way across the tundra when a sudden mudslide or crack in the permafrost caused the cub to fall and get trapped. The cub was buried in ice, preserving her fur, skin, and organs in almost perfect condition. This poor cub, later named Sparta, was discovered by mammoth tusk hunters in 2017, poking out of the melting permafrost in Yakutia, Siberia. Sparta is probably the best preserved Ice Age animal ever found, said Lovelock, one of the study's co-authors, going on to say that even her whiskers were preserved. Sparta died about 28,000 years ago, and she was actually found alongside another cub named Boris, who was even older, dying around 43,000 years ago. Both cubs were about 1 to 2 months old when they died, with their sharp teeth just starting to emerge. Cave lions were closely related to modern African lions and lived across the northern hemisphere during the Ice Age. Unlike today's lions, though, these were, of course, adapted to freezing cold weather. In 2020, a perfectly preserved bear mummy was discovered in the Siberian permafrost. Siberia again. But anyway, it wasn't quite what scientists expected. At first, researchers thought they'd found the remains of a giant extinct cave bear, but eventually they realized the bear was much younger and from a completely different species. The bear was found by reindeer herders on a remote island in the East Siberian Sea. It was so well preserved that scientists could still see its skin, fur, claws, teeth, nose, internal organs, and even body fat. The remains were named the Etherican bear after a nearby river. At first, researchers at the Lazarev Mammoth Museum believed the bear was a cave bear, a massive species that went extinct about 22,000 years ago, but this bear was only about 3,460 years old. Turned out to be a young female brown bear standing just over 5 feet tall and weighing around 172 pounds. It was probably around 2 to 3 years old when it died. The bear's stomach contents revealed it had been eating plants and birds, with feathers still found inside its belly, which is incredible when you think about it. It also had signs of spinal injuries, which may have contributed to its death. In 2016, a gold miner in Yukon, Canada discovered something frozen in the ice. It turned out to be an ancient wolf pup, which had been almost perfectly preserved for 57,000 years. The mummified gray wolf, known as Zur, was found in the Klondike goldfields near Dawson City. Lead researcher Julie Machin, an anatomy professor, called it, quote, the most complete wolf specimen ever found from the Ice Age, going on to say all her soft tissue, her hair, her skin, even her little nose is still there. She's just complete, and that is really rare. Using radiocarbon dating and DNA analysis, scientists confirmed Zur died at just 7 weeks old. The remains were especially important because they were discovered in North America, unlike most finds in Siberia, as you've seen from this list, which are harder to access. Machen and her team were able to link Zur's DNA to both ancient Beringian wolves from Yukon and Russian gray wolves, which means that ancient wolves from North America and Eurasia mixed. Zur's remains also showed them what Ice Age wolves ate. The assumption had always been that they mostly ate bison or oxen, but as it turned out, this wolf mostly consumed aquatic animals, much like modern wolves in Alaska. In 2011, members of a tribe in northern Siberia found the remains of a steppe bison, perfectly preserved after being frozen for nearly 10,000 years. The bison was transported to the Yakutian Academy of Sciences, where scientists began to study it. Unlike other bison mummies discovered over the years, this one was almost entirely intact, with its internal organs in remarkable condition. Olga Potapova, collections curator at the Mammoth site of Hot Springs, explained that while bison mummies are not uncommon, they're usually incomplete, saying, quote, Normally what you find with mummies of megafauna is partial carcasses, but this mummy was preserved so well that it earned a record for the level of its preservation. The bison, which was probably about 4 years old when it died, looked like it had starved to death. There was no fat around its abdomen, but its heart and digestive systems were pretty intact, even though some organs had shrunk over time. Researchers even managed to extract tissue samples from each organ, and for the first time ever, they found steppe bison brain tissue still preserved. In 2022, a nearly perfectly mummified baby woolly mammoth was discovered by a miner in the permafrost of Canada's Klondike goldfields, dating back around 30,000 years. The calf, thought to be around 1 month old when it died, was a female and measured just 4.5 feet long. Researchers described it as the most complete mummified mammoth found in North America. A lot of its skin and hair was still intact. As an Ice Age paleontologist, it had been one of my lifelong dreams to come face to face with a real woolly mammoth, said Grant Zazula, a paleontologist with the Yukon government, going on to describe the mammoth as, quote, one of the most incredible mummified Ice Age animals ever discovered in the world. The discovery happened when a mine worker hit something unexpected while digging. The team stopped all their work and brought in geologists who managed to recover the mammoth's remains, and just in time because a storm had been rolling in. Analysis suggested that the mammoth may have died after getting trapped in mud while grazing, with grass found in her stomach. In 2018, yet another incredible discovery was made in Siberia. The nearly perfectly preserved mummified remains of an Ice Age horse, believed to have died between 30,000 and 40,000 years ago. Its body was so well preserved that even tiny details like the hairs in its nostrils and around its hooves were still visible. The foal was found deep in a crater, about 328 feet or 100 meters deep, during an expedition in Yakutia. It was around 2 months old when it died. The mummified body was almost entirely intact, with no visible damage. Scientists collected samples from the foal's hair and tissue and found it belonged to an extinct species known as the Lena horse, which was genetically distinct from the wild horses that still roam the area today. This species lived in Siberia tens of thousands of years ago and disappeared long before modern horses evolved. In 2016, biologist Steve Emsley was in southern Antarctica when he came across something kind of confusing. It looked to be a recently abandoned Adelie penguin colony. There were mummified chicks, guano stains, pebbles from nests, but the thing is, Adelie penguins hadn't been spotted in the region for centuries. What Emsley soon discovered was that the penguin remains were far older than anyone could have imagined. Radiocarbon dating of the bones, eggshells, and mummified skin showed that these penguins had been dead for thousands of years. The rapidly melting ice in Antarctica revealed these ancient penguin remains. The penguins had likely settled in the area during warmer periods when the sea ice melted early, allowing the birds to reach the area and build their nests. The most recent colony, which had been buried during the Little Ice Age about 800 years ago, was finally uncovered as the region's ice began to recede. What you're looking at here is a tardigrade, aka a water bear. Now, is this a newly discovered alien species? Well, I wish, but no, these things actually exist right here at home. They're just really, really tiny, which I'm thankful for, because imagine if that alien-looking thing was the size of just even a regular house cat. That would just be horrifying. Tardigrades, nicknamed water bears, are one of the most resilient animals on the planet. They're microscopic animals that are known for their ability to survive in very extreme conditions all over the world. In places like Antarctica, they've been found frozen in ice for thousands of years. And what's amazing about these things is their ability to go into a kind of state of suspended animation. When conditions are harsh, like extreme cold or dryness, tardigrades dry out or freeze and enter a kind of hibernation. And when researchers thaw them out, they can come back to life. Water bears have even survived space travel in this dormant state. This makes them one of the toughest known organisms in the world. What you're looking at here is a water bear. Which Star Wars movie is it from? Well, none. These things actually exist right here at home. They're just really, really tiny, thankfully, because that thing looks like something from David Lynch's Dune. Wouldn't want to live in a world where this thing was as big as even a regular-sized house cat. Tardigrades, nicknamed water bears, are resilient, rather fascinating little creatures. They're microscopic animals that are known for their ability to survive in pretty extreme conditions. In Antarctica, tardigrades have been found frozen in ice for thousands of years. What's amazing about these little creatures is their ability to go into a state of suspended animation. When conditions are harsh, like extreme cold or dryness even, tardigrades dry out and enter a kind of hibernation. When researchers thaw them out, they can come back to life. Water bears have even survived space travel in this dormant state, making them one of the toughest known organisms. Their ability to withstand freezing, radiation, and even the vacuum of space just goes to show that these little things may be the hardiest little critters on the face of the planet. Back in 2015, Siberian herders made a pretty crazy discovery. While looking for mammoth ivory in the frozen tundra, they found a 12,400-year-old puppy frozen in the permafrost. It was incredibly well preserved. The puppy's fur, whiskers, even its little nose was still intact, which is pretty unheard of for animals that have been frozen for, tens of thousands of years. The craziest part is its brain. Most ancient animals that get frozen, especially ones that old, end up with their brains completely degraded. This puppy, though, had a brain that was almost entirely undamaged. Crazy. So, scientists think this thing could have been a link between ancient wolves and the first domesticated dogs, which is also huge. The preservation of this puppy could help us solve one of the biggest mysteries in human history. How did humans first tame wolves and turn them into dogs? By extracting its DNA, researchers could unlock a lot of answers, giving us a better idea of when and how dogs became the adorable pets that we know and love today. In 2011, a team of researchers in Siberia made an absolutely amazing find. It was a bison that had been frozen for over 9,000 years. They didn't just find bones, though. The thing was preserved like it had just died the day before. The bison was covered in thick fur, it still had some muscle tissue, and even some of its internal organs, including its heart, they were almost perfectly preserved. And that level of preservation is rare for something this old, even when frozen. And this is absolutely nuts, kind of gross. So to make things even more surreal, scientists actually cooked and ate a piece of the meat. They were curious to see what 9,000-year-old bison tasted like. Turns out the answer is not much. Apparently it was chewy, didn't really taste like a lot, because that's what happens when your meat's been sitting in the freezer for 9,000 years. I would not have tasted that, I don't think. I don't care how many scientists are around telling me it's safe. I just don't really see the point. You guys go ahead. In 2018, Russian researchers found a horsefowl in Siberia that had been frozen in permafrost for over 42,000 years. What's so mind-blowing about this find isn't just how old it was how it was preserved. The foal still had its hooves, its fur, even its internal organs. But what really sent scientists into a frenzy was the fact that its BLOOD was still inside its body. Bodily fluids from a horse that lived during the Ice Age, preserved for tens of thousands of years. Well, because there was so much of the animal still there, the discovery kinda got people talking about cloning. And it wasn't just a passing thought. Scientists started to seriously discuss whether this young horse could be the key to bringing extinct species back to life. I mean, imagine seeing a horse from the Ice Age galloping around again, just like something out of Jurassic Park. I mean, not as cool, because it would be a horse instead of a dinosaur, but still an ancient horse. It's something, at least. In 2021, scientists discovered a frozen mammoth in Siberia, and this one was unlike anything they'd seen before. Most frozen mammoths are found as skeletons, or with only small traces of flesh, but this one had actual chunks of flesh hanging from its bones. I mean, look at this thing, it almost looks like just a modern elephant. And again, it also had red stuff still in its body. Find helped scientists study how certain biological materials can survive freezing temperatures for such a long time. Researchers were able to collect samples of the BLOOD to analyze how it managed to stay in liquid form for so long, which could have massive implications for modern medicine. If scientists can figure out how mammoth BLOOD survived in permafrost, it could lead to breakthroughs in preserving organs for transplants, say. In 2022, scientists revived a virus that had been frozen for nearly 50,000 years. A virus called Pandoravirus yedoma was discovered in the Siberian permafrost. Fortunately, it only infects single-celled organisms, but the fact that something can survive being frozen for thousands and thousands of years and still be infectious, that opens up a lot of questions and concerns. For one, if a virus can stay in a state of suspended animation for that long and come back to life, what other dormant viruses viruses or pathogens could be lurking in the melting permafrost. Scientists are especially concerned because climate change is causing permafrost to thaw at a pretty alarming rate, meaning more ancient viruses and bacteria could be released into the world. There could be viruses from the Ice Age that might be deadly to humans. You know, us modern folk just wouldn't have the immunity to them. Kimberly Miner, a climate scientist at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, had this to say: "There's a lot going on with the permafrost that is of concern, and it really shows why it's super important that we keep as much of the permafrost frozen as possible." End quote. Now, to some, an old virus trapped in ice suddenly springing back to life and spreading across the world sounds like a zombie movie plot, and sure, the chances of things getting that bad are slim, but these frozen viruses are actually sometimes referred to as zombie viruses, and scientists have discovered some pretty unsettling things in the permafrost over the years. For example, in 1997, a lung sample from a woman buried in permafrost in Alaska was found to contain genetic material from the 1918 flu epidemic. Then in 2012, researchers confirmed that a 300-year-old mummy from Siberia had the genetic signatures of the smallpox virus, and just in 2016, there was a small anthrax outbreak in Siberia, which affected a small group of people and thousands of reindeer. This was also thanks to thawing permafrost. On a lighter note though, let's briefly talk about nematodes, also known as roundworms. This is another type of microscopic thing that can survive through freezing temperatures. In Antarctica, researchers have discovered these tiny worms frozen in the ice. Like tardigrades, nematodes can enter a state of suspended animation when conditions become too hard, and when they're thawed, they can sometimes revive and resume their normal activities. Not sure what nematodes get up to, probably not all that interesting, but still they can go back to doing whatever it is, which is pretty cool. It's also pretty cool is that scientists study these nematodes because their ability to survive might give us some clues about how to preserve other biological material and learn more about how life might survive in other extreme environments on Earth or even out in space. In 2020, researchers discovered the preserved remains of a woolly rhino on a Russian island. It still had some fur, its skin, and muscle tissue. What made it even more interesting is that the rhino was still a juvenile when it died, likely around 3 or 4 years old. Now, why is this so interesting? Well, because it was so young, only about 3 or 4, it helped researchers learn more about what growing up in the Ice Age was actually like, what they ate, how fast it grew, what kind of hellish environment it was dealing with, and how these things would have developed as they aged. In terms of how it died, it couldn't say for sure, but it looked like it probably drowned after falling through ice into freezing water. Instant deep freeze. This thing kind of looks like a brick too. It's like flat. Oh. Again, in 2020, scientists found a bird frozen so perfectly that it looked like it had just fallen out of the sky. It was a horned lark and had been dead for about 46,000 years. 46,000 years, and it looked like this. You know, still not like a great way for your body to be. Obviously the thing is dead, right? It doesn't look great. But if I were just looking at this image with no context, I would have thought it was dead for maybe 6 months. Not, 46,000 years. The bird was encased in ice, which preserved it in almost the same way it would have looked back in the Ice Age. Scientists took DNA samples to compare it to modern birds. The goal was to learn about how species evolved over tens of thousands of years and possibly understand how the climate changes of that era might have influenced bird evolution. Also gave them a great look at how the Ice Age didn't just freeze mammals, it preserved all kinds of life forms. In 2019, reindeer herders in Siberia came across something pretty macabre, but also really cool. A severed bear head, frozen solid in the permafrost. But this was a very old bear, a Pleistocene cave bear, a giant of the Ice Age that could grow up to 11 feet tall and weigh over 3,000 pounds. The head was almost perfectly preserved with fur, teeth, and even the brain still inside. The cave bear has been extinct for about 24,000 years, but this head was so well preserved it almost looked like it had been frozen yesterday. And I know what you're thinking, but no, they did not find the body. How did just the head survive so perfectly, and where is the rest of it? was it scavenged? That would be my guess. Hunters would have probably killed the thing and then ate the rest of its body. Deep in the frozen wilds of Siberia, a creature straight out of prehistoric times was found curled up in the permafrost, a baby saber-toothed cat. It was discovered in 2020 near the Indigirka River, and despite being over 35,000 years old, the thing looked like it had only been dead a few days. It had thick fur, skin, claws, even its internal organs. It was all still there, and yes, the tiny sabers too. Scientists think it might have been buried in a landslide and flash frozen before decay could even start, and wasn't alone. Another cub, a few years younger, was found in the same region, preserved the same eerie way. But nobody's rushing to thaw these little killers out. The deeper they look, the more they realize just how little they know about these ancient predators. There's something about seeing a baby version of something so dangerous, though, that just hits different. Like, it's cute, but also very much not. In 2016, a gold miner working near Dawson City in Canada's Yukon territory came across something in the permafrost, a perfectly preserved Ice Age wolf pup, frozen for over 57,000 years. It wasn't a skeleton or a pile of fur and bones, it was an entire wolf, with skin, fur, tiny claws, even some of its whiskers were still intact. Genetic testing showed that it came from an ancient extinct branch, older than modern gray wolves, and adapted to a world most humans wouldn't survive 5 minutes in. They think it died inside its den. Maybe the roof collapsed, maybe the ground shifted, but either way, something sealed it in tight and froze it solid before decay had even had a chance to start. And that kind of preservation doesn't happen unless the timing is perfect, and honestly, it's a little creepy how perfect it was. The more scientists studied it, the more questions they had about its species, about how it got so well preserved, about what else might be hiding under the ice just as intact. In the Siberian permafrost, scientists found 2 cave-lion cubs so well preserved they didn't really look ancient, they looked recent. But these weren't house cats. They were baby versions of Panthera spile, aka the Eurasian cave lion. These things were massive, possibly larger than modern lions, and built for brute power. They hunted mammoths, they hunted bison, they hunted each other. One study found bones of a cave lion that had been gnawed on by another cave lion. The 2 frozen cubs, dubbed Sparta and Boris, are estimated to be around 30,000 years old, and scientists still don't know how they died exactly, but they're so well preserved, they're actually talking of cloning. The thing is, nobody's sure what kind of animal behavior you'd get out of these things if you actually defrosted them. Their instincts are 30,000 years old and hardwired for a world we don't live in anymore. So what could possibly go wrong there? In 2015, researchers in Siberia discovered a frozen woolly rhino calf that had been locked in ice for over 34,000 years. Its name is Sasha, and it's the only baby woolly rhino ever found. And it's not just bones, this thing still had skin, hair, a stubby little horn, even muscle tissue. But don't let the baby part fool you, woolly rhinos were absolute tanks. Adults could weigh over 2 tons, with horns up to 3 feet long, and you'd think for their size that they'd be slow too, but fossil evidence shows they could charge like a freight train, and they likely had tempers to match. These animals were built for war against the cold, against predators, and sometimes even against each other. Ancient cave art shows humans were just terrified of these things, often drawing them mid-charge or goring other animals, or again locked in battle with each other. If anyone's thinking of cloning a few of these things, they better make sure the fencing is just really strong. You can't see them with the naked eye, but Deloid rotifers are kind of freaky. These tiny aquatic creatures were found frozen in the Siberian permafrost, buried 11 feet deep and at least 24,000 years old. Scientists thawed them out and they started moving. So after 2.5 ice ages, they just woke up. They also cloned themselves. Deloid rotifers reproduce through parthenogenesis, which means they've got no need for males. They can just endlessly self-copy, and they don't just survive cold. They can endure radiation, starvation, dehydration, even the vacuum of space. Their bodies will just shut down but stay preserved, and then when conditions are right, they kind of reboot. Now scientists are wondering how long they can actually last and how many more are still down there dormant waiting. In the icy ground of Siberia, scientists have dug up baby mammoths so perfectly preserved they still have eyelashes. One of the most famous is Lyuba, found in 2007 by a reindeer herder. She's around 42,000 years old, but she still has skin, fur, internal organs. Even the milk from her mother is still inside her stomach. Another calf, Yuka, was found with strange cut marks on her bones, like something or someone had been trying to carve her up. Could have been ancient human butchering, attacks from other predators, but the truth is nobody knows exactly what happened. Every time one of these calves gets pulled from the permafrost, though, it cranks up the conversation about cloning, but even if they could bring one of these things back, should they? Once again in Siberia and Alaska, scientists have found ancient bison that are so well preserved they still had red in their veins. One of the best examples was discovered in 1979, a frozen bison they named Blue Babe because of this bluish tint from the minerals in the soil. The thing had muscle, skin, even visible wounds. It had clearly been killed by something, and then it froze before it could rot. But here's something pretty cool. These mummified bison showed signs of being stalked and eaten by predators that do not exist anymore. Deep claw marks, crushed vertebrae, and punctures that match the bite force of predators that have been extinct for a very, very long time. And scientists haven't just found one, there are multiple ancient bison mummies turning up as the permafrost melts, and each one paints a clear picture of this brutal predatory world buried under the ice. They're also keeping samples for cloning research potentially, so if you ever wanted to see a prehistoric beast brought back from the dead, they are kinda working on it. In Yukon, Canada, buried in the permafrost, scientists uncovered the frozen remains of Ice Age horses that once galloped across the tundra in massive herds. Obviously, they weren't like today's horses. They were stockier, hairier, adapted to survive in some of the harshest conditions Earth has ever seen. One foal, perfectly preserved, was found in a gold mine in 2018, still covered in reddish-brown fur. Hooves, eyelashes, even its stomach contents intact. It was over 40,000 years old, but looked more like it had just lain down for a nap. The species, Aquis lambe, went extinct thousands of years ago, but DNA from these frozen animals are so well preserved sometimes, scientists are seriously considering using it for cloning. The idea is to bring them back, and not just as a curiosity, but possibly to repopulate the tundra with them to help slow permafrost melt. Because right now it's melting faster than ever, and we're seeing more and more pieces of an ecosystem that hasn't seen sunlight in tens of thousands of years, and not everything coming out of the ice is dead. In 2014, scientists digging through 30,000-year-old permafrost in Siberia found something that was very much not extinct, a virus, a massive one. So big you could see it under a regular microscope. They called it Pithovirus sibericum, and it's part of a terrifying new category, giant viruses. Two words you just don't want to hear right beside each other. Well, this ancient giant virus actually reanimated after being frozen for tens of thousands of years, and more of these ancient viruses have been found since, buried in melting ice, all still capable of waking up and infecting hosts. The one they revived didn't target humans, just amoebas, thankfully. But that's the part that makes researchers nervous. If some ancient virus can survive that long, what else is waiting to thaw? And are we even remotely prepared for it? Because you can quarantine, a lion, you can contain a mammoth, but a virus you've never dealt with before? Good luck. In Canada's Yukon territory, scientists came across bones and fragments of an animal that sounds made up. Giant Ice Age camels. Yes, camels in the snow. Kind of a bizarre image. Not the two-humped animals we know today, obviously. They were massive and built to survive brutal cold, not scorching heat. They had long legs, thick fat stores, and bones tougher than steel. Fossils of these ancient camels were found in gold mines near Dawson City, preserved in permafrost so well, researchers were able to extract collagen from their bones, something that usually doesn't survive past a few thousand years. These camels would have roamed the same icy landscape as mammoths, direwolves, and saber-tooth cats. Some estimates say they stood over 9 feet tall, and while they might not look terrifying at first glance, just their sheer size, the power, the fact that they existed existed in this totally different version of North America, it makes them feel more like monsters than mammals. Scientists still don't completely understand how they adapted to such extreme environments or how they disappeared, but every time the ground thaws a little more bones come up, and we're starting to realize just how alien the Ice Age really was.